The stars had always called to humanity. For 300 years, ever since the first human ship had crossed into deep space and made contact with alien life, Earth had been part of something bigger. The collective assembly welcomed them. 12 species, spread across thousands of worlds, all working together in peace. Humanity was the member, and everyone treated them like children who had just learned to walk. Admiral Daniel stood at the wide window of his office aboard the orbital station called Sentinel. Below him, Earth turned slowly, blue and green and beautiful. He had spent 40 years in the United Earth Defense Force, climbing through the ranks, learning secrets that most humans would never know. Now, at 62 years old, he carried the weight of those secrets every single day. His office door slid open with a soft hiss. Commander walked in, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She was younger than him by 20 years, with sharp eyes and a mind that could see patterns others missed. She carried it in her hands and her face was serious. "The ambassador delivered his message an hour ago," she said. "It's not good." Daniel did not turn from the window. "Tell me." "Set thee on his desk. They want 3 of our outer colonies, New Helsinki, Prosperity Station, and the mining operations on 7. If we don't hand them over within 30 solar cycles, they say they will take them by force." Now Daniel turned. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. "How many ships do they have at the border?" 4,000, all combat vessels, the biggest fleet they have ever assembled." Daniel walked to his desk and picked up He read the message slowly. The words were arrogant and cruel, written by beings who believed they had nothing to fear. The Dominion had conquered 17 species in the past 500 years. They were reptilian, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scales like armor and claws that could tear through steel. They respected only one thing: power. And they believed humanity had none. "What does the assembly say?" Daniel asked. Let out a bitter laugh. "They are urging us to accept the terms." High Arbiter Aura sent a private message expressing her sympathy, but she made it clear that the assembly will not intervene. "They say we are too weak to fight. They say resistance would only lead to our extinction." Daniel set down He walked back to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the darkness, the fleet was gathering. 4,000 ships filled with soldiers who had never known defeat. They looked at humanity and saw easy prey. They had no idea what they were really dealing with. Daniel said quietly, "Do you know why humanity has always acted weak?" She stepped closer to him. "Because we were playing a role. We have been playing it for 300 years. "Yes," Daniel nodded slowly. "When we first made contact with the assembly, we saw how the galaxy worked. We saw species that had been conquered and enslaved. We saw empires that ruled through fear, and we made a choice. We decided to hide what we really were." Knew the history. Every officer at her level did, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a chill down her spine. Humanity had not forgotten its past. The world wars, the nuclear standoffs, the genocides and the famines and the endless cycles of violence. For thousands of years, humans had fought each other with terrible creativity. They had invented weapons that could crack the planet in half. They had developed strategies that could break the will of entire nations. When peace finally came to Earth, it came with a promise: never again. Humanity would never again destroy itself. But they also knew something else. They knew that the universe was not safe. They knew that somewhere out there, predators were waiting. So they prepared. "The fleet the assembly knows about," Daniel said, "is 60 patrol ships, old, outdated, barely enough to police our own trade routes." "And the real fleet?" asked, even though she already knew the answer. Daniel smiled, but there was no joy in it. "The real fleet has been building for 3 centuries, hidden shipyards on Mars, manufacturing plants inside hollowed asteroids, training facilities beneath the ice of Europa. We have 17,000 combat-ready warships, 47 Titan-class dreadnoughts, each 115 kilometers long, drone swarms that number in the millions. weapons that the assembly cannot even imagine. The numbers hung in the air between them. It was more than the combined military strength of every other species in the galaxy. They have 4,000 ships, said slowly. We have 17,000. And ours are better, Daniel added. Faster, stronger, more advanced. We have had 300 years to study every weapon in the galaxy and build something superior. He turned to face her fully. But that is not the point. The point is that we never wanted to use them. We built this strength so that no one would ever force us into a war. We stayed hidden because we knew what would happen if the galaxy saw us as a threat. They would unite against us. Exactly. So we played the part of the harmless newcomers. We traded. We cooperated. We made friends where we could. And we waited, hoping we would never need to reveal what we had built. Looked down at on the desk. The ultimatum glowed on the screen. And now? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a cargo ship drifted past, carrying supplies to one of the lunar colonies. Life went on, peaceful and ordinary, even as war gathered on the horizon. Now, Daniel said finally, we have no choice. They will not stop at 3 colonies. They never stop. If we show weakness, they will take everything. And if we let them, other predators will follow. He reached for his communicator and pressed a button. A soft tone indicated that his message was being recorded and encrypted. This is Admiral Daniel, authorization code Omega-77. Initiate protocol sunrise. I repeat, initiate protocol sunrise. All hidden fleet elements are to begin deployment preparation. The masquerade is over. He ended the recording and sent it. Somewhere in the depths of space, in shipyards that officially did not exist, lights were beginning to turn on. Engines that had waited decades for this moment were starting to warm up. Crews who had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come were receiving their orders. Watched him with a mixture of fear and something else, something that might have been relief. What happens now? She asked. Daniel looked out at the stars one last time. Now, he said, we show the galaxy what humanity really is, and we pray that when they see us, they choose peace. But in his heart, he knew the truth. They would not choose peace. They could not. They had built their entire civilization on conquest and domination. They would look at humanity's hidden strength and see it as a challenge. And then the galaxy would learn why Earth had been so afraid of its own power. The Great Hall of Prime was the most beautiful place in the known galaxy. Its walls were made of living crystal that grew slowly over thousands of years, forming shapes and patterns that seemed almost alive. Light from 3 distant suns filtered through the structure, casting rainbows across the polished floor. Here, in this ancient place, the collective assembly gathered to decide the fate of civilizations. Ambassador Cole had been to this hall many times. He was a calm man in his 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes that hid a sharp mind. For 20 years, he had represented humanity to the galaxy. He had smiled at beings who looked down on his species. He had nodded politely when they called humans primitive. He had played his role perfectly, never once letting them see what really lay behind his humble manner. Today would be different. The chamber was packed with representatives from all 12 member species. They floated in tanks of glowing liquid, their bioluminescent bodies pulsing with emotion. They stood like statues of living crystal, light refracting through their forms. They huddled in their environmental suits, their eyes watching everything. And at the center of the room, towering above everyone else, stood the delegation. Ambassador OK was everything his species was known for. Nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales with eyes like burning coals. He carried himself with absolute confidence. Why wouldn't he? His people had conquered half the galaxy. They had never been defeated. High Arbiter Aura called the session to order. She was, her body a soft blue glow that shifted with her moods. Today, that glow was pale and worried. We have gathered to address the crisis between the Dominion and the human territories, she announced. The Dominion has issued an ultimatum demanding the surrender of 3 human colonies. Their fleet of 4,000 warships stands ready at the border. We must find a peaceful solution. OK let out a low, rumbling sound that might have been laughter. There is no crisis, High Arbiter. The humans will surrender their colonies or they will be destroyed. It is very simple. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Most of the delegates looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke against the. They were all afraid. The Dominion was too powerful to challenge. Aura turned her attention to Ambassador Cole. Humanity has had time to consider the Dominion's terms. What is your response? Stood slowly. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every species present. When he spoke, his voice was mild and pleasant, as if he were discussing the weather. The United Earth government appreciates the Assembly's concern for our. It is good to know that our friends care about our fate. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something small but significant. However, I have been authorized to inform this body that Earth will not be surrendering any territories. Not now, not ever. Silence fell over the chamber. Then OK laughed again, louder this time. You choose extinction. How very foolish. Your species has 60 ships. We have 4,000. This is not a battle, human. It is a harvest. Smiled. It was a strange smile, calm and patient, like a teacher about to correct a student's mistake. You are correct that the galaxy knows of 60 human patrol vessels, he said. What the galaxy does not know is that those ships represent approximately 0.3% of our actual military capacity. The laughter died in OK's throat. Around the chamber, delegates leaned forward, confusion on their faces. Reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. Before this situation escalates further, the United Earth government has voted to declassify certain information. In the interest of transparency, I would like to share some data with the Assembly. He activated the device. A hologram sprang to life in the center of the chamber, filling the space between the delegates with light and detail. The image showed ships, hundreds of ships, thousands of ships. They hung in formation, sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that none of the watching aliens recognized. This is the Third Fleet, said calmly. One of 12 currently active battle groups. Each fleet consists of approximately 800 capital ships, supported by carriers, destroyers, and autonomous combat drones. The hologram shifted. New images appeared, showing shipyards the size of small moons, hidden inside asteroids and buried beneath planetary surfaces. These are some of our manufacturing facilities. We have others, many others. Over the past 300 years, humanity has constructed approximately 17,000 combat-ready warships. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The chamber had become as silent as deep space. Aura's glow had faded to almost nothing. 17,000, she whispered. Yes, nodded. But those are just our standard vessels. Allow me to show you something else. The hologram changed again. This time, a single ship appeared. It was enormous, dwarfing everything else that had been shown. 15 kilometers from bow to stern, covered in armor plating meters thick, carrying weapons that looked like they could crack a planet in half. This is a Titan-class dreadnought, explained. Earth currently maintains 47 of these vessels in active service. Each one carries enough firepower to match an entire battle group. OK stepped forward, his claws scraping against the crystal floor. His voice had lost its arrogance. This is a trick, electronic deception. You cannot have built this without anyone knowing. We absolutely could, replied. And we did. For 300 years, humanity has been preparing for the day when someone would try to do exactly what you are doing now. We studied every weapon in this galaxy. We analyzed every strategy. And we built something better, something that could never be defeated. He deactivated the hologram and slipped the device back into his pocket. When he spoke again, His voice was still mild, still pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Ambassador OK, your fleet is impressive. 4,000 ships is a significant force, but you should know that as we speak, 12 human battle groups are moving into position around your armada. That is 9,600 capital ships, not counting support vessels or drone swarms. Your forces are surrounded. The scales had gone pale. His claws twitched at his sides. You are lying, he said, but his voice was uncertain now. I never lie, said. It's one of my few flaws. The data I have presented has been by neutral parties and is available for review by any member of this assembly. Humanity has no desire for war. We never have. We built this strength not to conquer, but to ensure that no one could ever force us into a conflict we did not choose. He gathered his materials and prepared to leave. At the doorway, he turned back one final time. The Dominion has 30 hours to withdraw from human space. After that, our fleets will engage. And Ambassador, he looked directly at OK, we will not be showing mercy. We cannot afford to, so please, for the sake of your people, make the right choice. He walked out of the chamber, leaving the most powerful beings in the galaxy staring at each other in stunned silence. The mask had finally slipped, and nothing would ever be the same again. Deep beneath the red surface of Mars, in tunnels that had been carved out of rock over 2 centuries ago, the lights were coming on. Commander Amy Tucker stood at the observation window of Shipyard 7, watching as the massive doors began to open. She was 45 years old, with short brown hair and the calm confidence of someone who had trained her entire life for this moment. Around her, thousands of crew members moved through the corridors, taking their positions, running final checks on systems that had been waiting in silence for decades. Power levels are optimal across all vessels, reported Lieutenant Palmer from his station behind her. He was young, barely 30, but he had the same steady focus as everyone else in the hidden fleet. They had all known this day would come eventually. Third Fleet is ready for deployment. Amy nodded slowly. Through the window, she could see the ships emerging from their berths. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers the size of small cities. They moved in perfect formation, their engines glowing bright blue against the darkness of the underground cavern. Signal the other yards, she said. Begin coordinated launch sequence. All fleets are to reach the assembly point within 18 hours. Across human space, the same scene was playing out. On the ice moon of Europa, hidden beneath kilometers of frozen water, shipyard after shipyard was releasing its vessels. In the asteroid belt, rocks that had seemed dead and empty were splitting open, revealing warships that had waited in the darkness like sleeping giants. On Venus, in platforms that floated above the toxic clouds, carriers began their descent toward open space. 17,000 ships. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. On Earth, President Lisa stood before a crowd of millions in the central plaza of Geneva. Behind her, the flags of every nation on the planet flew together, united as they had been for 300 years. The broadcast was going out to every human colony, every space station, every ship in the fleet. She knew that billions of eyes were watching her. My fellow humans, she began, her voice strong and clear. Today we face a choice that we hoped would never come. An empire that has conquered and enslaved countless species has turned its eyes toward our homes. They have given us an ultimatum, surrender or die. They believe we are weak. They believe we have nothing to fight with. They are wrong. She paused, letting her words sink in. In the crowd, parents held their children close. Soldiers in uniform stood at attention. Old men and women who remembered the stories of Earth's violent past wiped tears from their eyes. For 300 years, humanity has hidden its true strength from the galaxy. We did this not out of fear, but out of wisdom. We knew what power could do. We had seen it in our own history, in the wars that nearly destroyed us, in the weapons we built that could end all life on our world. We promised ourselves that we would never become conquerors. We would never become oppressors. And so we hid and we watched, and we hoped that the galaxy would let us live in peace. Behind her, a hologram appeared, showing the fleets now streaming out of their hidden bases. The crowd gasped as they saw the true scale of what humanity had built. But peace cannot exist when predators are hungry. The Dominion does not understand mercy. They do not believe in coexistence. If we show them weakness, they will devour us. And after us, they will devour others. Species that cannot defend themselves. Worlds that have no fleets, no weapons, no hope. Lisa's expression hardened. Today we reveal ourselves, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to draw a line that no tyrant will ever cross. Humanity stands for something greater than survival. We stand for the idea that all beings deserve freedom, that the strong should protect the weak, that power without restraint is no power at all. She raised her hand toward the hologram. To the Dominion, I say this. You have 30 hours to withdraw from our borders. After that, we will engage your fleet, and we will show you why the humans were afraid of themselves long before we ever feared anything in the stars. The broadcast ended. Across human space, a strange silence settled over the population. Then slowly, a sound began to build. Applause, cheering. The sound of billions of voices raised together in something that was half celebration and half war cry. In orbit above the meridian threshold, the boundary between human space and territory, Commander Amy Tucker's ship took its position at the head of the combined fleet. Through her bridge windows, she could see the armada in the distance, 4,000 ships arranged in a massive wall of steel and fire. Incoming transmission from the flagship, reported. Put it through. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar from intelligence briefings. Fleet Commander Ev, the most decorated military leader in history. He had personally overseen the conquest of 5 species. His scales were marked with ritual scars, each one representing a victory. Human vessel, he growled. I have seen the data your ambassador presented. I do not believe it. Sensor ghosts and electronic tricks. Your species is known for deception. Amy leaned back in her chair. Then you have a choice to make, Commander. Withdraw and discover the truth in safety, or advance and discover it the hard way. The Dominion does not retreat. Ev's eyes burned with pride in something else, something that might have been doubt. My honor demands battle. My emperor demands victory. Whatever you have built, it cannot match the might of the war machine. Amy was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was almost sad. Commander, I am going to tell you something that your intelligence services never discovered. Humanity spent most of its history at war with itself. For thousands of years, we killed each other with every weapon we could imagine. We invented bombs that could destroy entire cities in seconds. We developed poisons that could kill millions in hours. We created machines that could make decisions faster than any living mind, and we taught those machines to kill. She stood up and walked closer to the screen. When we finally stopped fighting each other, we made a promise. Never again. We would never again turn our creativity toward destruction. But we also made a second promise. We would never let anyone force us to break the first one. She paused. You are about to force us to break it. Please, Commander, turn your fleet around. There has been enough death in this galaxy. Eth stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, his bridge crew waited in tense silence. You speak well, human, he said finally. But words are not weapons. If your fleet is real, prove it. If it is not, then die knowing you tried to bluff a superior enemy. The transmission ended. Amy returned to her chair and looked out at the stars. The fleet was beginning to move, advancing toward the threshold. In a few hours, millions would die. All ships, she said quietly, prepare for combat. May God forgive us for what we are about to do. The human fleet began to move, and the galaxy held its breath. The first shot was fired at exactly 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. A cruiser, eager for glory, broke formation and lunged toward the nearest human vessel. Its captain believed he would strike the first blow of a great victory. He believed his name would be remembered forever. He was half right. The human destroyer that intercepted him was called the Swift Justice. It was less than a third of the cruiser's size. By every standard of galactic warfare, it should have been destroyed in seconds. Instead, it fired once. A beam of coherent light, brighter than any star, lanced across the void. It struck the cruiser amidships and passed through it like a knife through water. The cruiser broke in half. Its reactor detonated. In less than 3 seconds, a ship that had taken 5 years to build became an expanding cloud of superheated debris. Across the fleet, sensor operators stared at their screens in disbelief. That single shot had carried more energy than a battleship could generate in an hour, and the human ship that fired it was one of the smallest vessels on the field. Fleet Commander Eth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the destruction of the cruiser with cold eyes. He had seen death before. He had caused more than his share, but something about this felt different. For the first time in his long career, he felt a small, cold seed of doubt in his stomach. "All ships advance," he ordered. "Full attack formation. Show these humans the meaning of might." 4,000 ships surged forward, their weapons charged. Their shields glowed with power. They were the greatest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled, veterans of 100 conquests. They would not be stopped by one lucky shot. Commander Amy Tucker watched them come. On her tactical display, the fleet appeared as a swarm of red dots, spreading across the void like a wave of blood. They outnumbered her immediate force 2-1. "Deploy the drones," she said calmly. From the carriers at the rear of the human formation, hatches opened. Thousands upon thousands of small craft poured out into space. They were unmanned, controlled by artificial minds that could think 1,000,000 times faster than any organic brain. Each drone was armed with weapons that could punch through armor like paper. There were 2 million of them. The advance faltered as their sensors registered the new contacts. Their captains shouted orders, trying to adjust their tactics. But it was too late. The drones swept into their formation like a storm of angry hornets, striking from every direction at once. Ships began to die, first by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Their shields, which could resist the combined fire of multiple enemy vessels, flickered and failed under the precise, coordinated attacks of the drone swarms. Their armor, which had never been breached by any weapon in the galaxy, melted under beams of focused energy. Eth gripped the arms of his command chair as his flagship shuddered under impact after impact. On the screens around him, ship after ship winked out of existence. The Eternal Conquest was surrounded by the wreckage of his own fleet. "Get me a count," he growled. "How many have we lost?" His tactical officer was shaking. 1,400 vessels destroyed, Commander. Another 800 crippled. Estimated enemy losses. He checked his readouts again, as if unable to believe them. 14 ships, sir. The humans have lost 14 ships. Eth felt the blood drain from his face. In less than 2 hours, his mighty armada had been cut in half, and they had barely scratched the human fleet. "Commander," another officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Put it through." Amy Tucker's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired, sad even, but her voice was steady. "Fleet Commander, you have fought bravely. Your warriors have died with honor, but this battle is over. You cannot win. I am offering you one final chance to withdraw. Take your surviving ships and go home. Tell your emperor what you have seen. There does not need to be any more death today." Eth was silent for a long moment. Around him, his officers watched, waiting for his decision. The flames of dying ships reflected in his eyes. "The Dominion does not surrender," he said finally, but his voice had lost its strength. "No," Amy agreed, "but the Dominion can retreat. That is not the same thing. Take your people home, Commander. Give them a chance to build something better than war. The transmission ended. Eth sat in his chair, surrounded by the ruins of his fleet, and made the hardest decision of his life. All ships, he said heavily, fall back, return to space. 2,600 vessels, all that remained of the greatest armada in galactic history, turned and limped away from the meridian threshold. Behind them, the human fleet held its position, watching silently as the enemy retreated. The battle of the meridian threshold was over. It had lasted 6 hours. News of the engagement spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Neutral observation posts had recorded everything. Sensor logs were analyzed. Data was and slowly the truth settled over the civilized species like a cold fog. The humans had been hiding. For 300 years, they had been building a military force that dwarfed anything else in existence. They could have conquered the galaxy at any time. They could have done what countless empires before them had done, and crushed all resistance beneath their heel. But they hadn't. In the crystalline halls of Prime, the collective assembly met in emergency session. The chamber was quieter than anyone had ever known it. High Arbiter Aura floated in her tank, her glow so pale it was almost invisible. "We have confirmed Earth's claims," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Their military capacity exceeds the combined forces of all assembly members, by a factor of at least 3. The delegate, a being of living crystal, spoke next. "They could have taken everything. For 3 centuries they could have conquered us all. Why didn't they?" Ambassador Cole rose from his seat. He looked older than he had before, as if the weight of recent days had settled on his shoulders. "Because we did not want to," he said simply. "Humanity has seen what empires do. We have been the conquered and the conquerors. We know the price of domination, and we decided long ago that we would never pay it again." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every species present. "We built our strength not to rule, but to protect, to ensure that no one could ever force us to become something we hate. They gave us no choice but to reveal ourselves, but nothing has changed. We do not want war. We do not want power. We only want to live in peace and to help others do the same." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of beings trying to understand something entirely new. For the first time in galactic history, there was a power that could not be defeated, and that power was offering friendship instead of chains. The galaxy had gone quiet, and in that quiet, something was beginning to change. 6 months had passed since the battle of the Meridian Threshold, and the galaxy had become a very different place. The Dominion was falling apart. For 5 centuries, they had held their empire together through fear and force. Conquered species had obeyed because they had no choice. Resistance meant death. Rebellion meant extinction. That was the only law the Dominion understood. But now, everyone knew that the Dominion could be beaten. They had watched the most powerful fleet in history retreat in ruins. They had seen the weapons that could break through scales that no other species could scratch. And they had heard the promise that humanity made: "We will defend those who cannot defend themselves." On 17 different worlds, the conquered rose up against their masters. Factory workers sabotaged production lines. Slave soldiers turned their weapons on their overseers. Government buildings burned. Statues of emperors came crashing down. And everywhere the fighting was heaviest, human ships appeared in orbit. Commander stood in the cargo bay of the relief vessel Hope Carrier, watching as crates of food and medical supplies were loaded onto transport shuttles. Through the bay's wide doors, he could see the planet below. 3. Just 1 month ago, it had been an agricultural colony, worked by enslaved who had never known freedom. Now the garrison was gone, and the people were rebuilding. "Commander," called Ensign Penny from across the bay, "the first shuttle is ready for departure." Nodded. "Send it down. And make sure the medical teams know that the children are the priority. Some of those little ones haven't had proper nutrition in years. He walked to the observation window and looked down at three. They were a gentle species, small and covered in soft blue fur, with 4 eyes that seemed too large for their faces. They had been conquered 200 years ago. 3 generations had lived and died under rule. None of them had ever seen a sky without ships casting shadows across it. Until now. An hour later, took a shuttle down to the surface. The central square of the capital city was crowded watching with wonder as humans distributed supplies. Children ran between the crates, laughing and playing, many of them experiencing full meals for the first time in their lives. A young girl approached as he supervised the distribution. She was tiny, barely up to his knee, with bright orange fur and 4 wide eyes that shimmered with curiosity. "Are you really human?" she asked through her translator device. Knelt down so he could look at her directly. "That's right, my name is What's Yours?" She studied his face with obvious fascination. "My mother says humans are the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She says you could destroy anyone you wanted." Smiled gently. "Maybe we could, but power isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you choose to protect." The girl thought about this for a moment. Then she smiled back, showing tiny teeth, and ran off to rejoin her friends. Watched her go, feeling something warm in his chest. This was why they had revealed themselves, not for glory, not for power, but for moments like this, for children who would never know the fear of masters, for species who would finally have a chance to live free. Back on Earth, Admiral Daniel stood before the memorial wall in Geneva. It was a vast structure, nearly a kilometer long, made of black stone polished to a mirror finish. Carved into that stone were names. Billions of names. Every human who had died in war, from the earliest tribal conflicts to the nuclear exchanges of the 21st century. Every victim of genocide, every casualty of conquest, every soldier who had fallen fighting their own kind. It had taken 50 years to carve all the names, and when it was finished, humanity had sworn an oath: never again. Found him there as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the plaza. She walked up beside him and stood in silence for a while, looking at the names. "The Emperor has requested a meeting," she said finally. "He wants to negotiate a formal peace treaty. His empire is collapsing, and he knows he cannot rebuild without our permission." Daniel nodded slowly. "What are his terms?" "Complete withdrawal from all conquered territories, war reparations to every species the Dominion has harmed, dismantling of their military-industrial complex." Paused. "He is surrendering everything, Daniel. The most powerful empire in galactic history, and they are giving up because they are terrified of us." Daniel traced his fingers across one of the names on the wall. A soldier from the old wars. Someone who had died before humanity had learned better. "Is that what we wanted?" he asked quietly. "For them to be terrified?" "No," shook her head. "But fear is sometimes the first step toward understanding. They will learn to see us differently in time. Right now they are afraid. But maybe in a generation or two, their children will see humans the way that little girl does, not as monsters but as protectors." Daniel turned away from the wall and looked up at the sky. Night was falling, and the stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere up there, the hidden fleets had returned to their silent posts, watching over human space and the species that had asked for protection. "We showed them what we are," he said. "The strength we kept hidden for 3 centuries, but that was only half the revelation." "What was the other half?" Daniel smiled, but there was weight behind it. The weight of history, the weight of responsibility. "The other half was showing them what we are not. We are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We have all the power in the galaxy, and we choose not to use it for domination. That is something no species in galactic history has ever done before. It terrifies them because they cannot understand it." He began walking back toward the government building, falling into step beside him. Eventually, they will understand, he continued. They will realize that strength without wisdom is just brutality, that real power lies in knowing when not to fight, that the measure of a civilization is not what it can destroy, but what it can build. Looked at him, and until then, we do what we have always done. We protect the weak. We stand against the bullies. We try to be better tomorrow than we were today. He stopped at the building's entrance and looked back at the memorial wall one last time. And we never, ever forget what we learned the hard way. Across the galaxy, a new phrase was spreading. It passed from species to species, from world to world, whispered in trading posts and diplomatic halls and the dark corners of frontier colonies. Do not wake the humans. It was a warning, a prayer, a recognition of something unprecedented in galactic history, a species with the power to conquer everything, who chose instead to protect. A civilization that had learned the horrors of war from fighting itself, and had emerged with something the galaxy had never seen before. Restraint. The galaxy had gone quiet, and in that silence, watched over by the guardians who asked for nothing in return, true peace was finally beginning to take root. And far out in the darkness, on the edge of known space, the human fleets kept their eternal vigil, patient, watchful, ready. But hopping, they would never be needed again.